So I recently wrote a blog post on how you can think about who to trust. So I've been reading this book called Behave by Robert Sapolsky, and in it he gives the neurobiology of behavior. So why we choose to make the decisions that we do or not choose. And one of the most interesting facts that he talks about is we have this thing called the amygdala. It's an almond-sized growth in the brain that is our fear processing center. Fear is extremely common to most animals on the earth. And we have this amygdala. It processes fear. It processes fear all the time. So it's always on. It's always scanning your environment unconsciously for things that might be fearful or might be dangerous. I'm sorry. And the thing in humans is that we also have something surrounding this amygdala. It's called the basolateral amygdala as compared to the central amygdala. And the basolateral amygdala actually learns fear. We start off as babies and we trust everyone. And then we start to learn that we shouldn't trust everyone, either because our parents tell us or because we learn from bad mistakes. And so this basolateral amygdala helps us to learn to not trust people. That's really important. And particularly for people who are on the autism spectrum, because they don't learn that really well. And so I'm giving this personal example because I had an issue where I trusted somebody who was charismatic. And I think this is pretty common, not only to people with sensory issues like autism, but I trusted somebody because they were charismatic and warm. And oftentimes people conflate warmth with trust. And so I learned an important lesson not to trust everyone because they're charismatic, but I can still be warm to everybody because that costs me nothing. So I can still be warm to people, but how do I? And this is a really good question. So I wrote this article about it, my newsletter at stuartalsop.substack.com. And a friend of mine, Alex, said, yeah, that's a really good idea, but there's some other things. And he said that trust is both a continuum and is context dependent. You can trust virtually everyone for things that have no downside risk, which is a really important point. So trusting someone is really, you can trust people as long as you're not going to as long as it's not a huge risk to trust them. So trusting the person serving you coffee, there's an element of trust. This gets into trusting other drivers and culture because you're on a road and you pretty much trust most of the people on the road to stop at the stop sign. And most people do, which is really interesting. And another thing Alex says is, I don't think anyone should get 100% trust ever. This would indicate a lack of critical thinking or pure reliance on blind faith. Hence the saying, trust but verify. Another very good point. And he says, sometimes you can trust someone in one context and not in another. Maybe you trust them to be emotionally supportive, but not in financial matters. So really good points there. Another friend of mine asked me to expand more. Particularly, I'd like to hear some examples, specifically how you decide on who to trust. It's a good question. I haven't really thought about it before, but here I go. I'll just think about it live as I'm doing this video. The way that I trust people is there's this feeling of solidness in my body when I ask myself about this person. It's also a good way to ask yourself whether something's true or not. You can do this trick. It's a great experiment. You can tell yourself a statement that's true and then say, so for example, I'll do it right now. I am in the United States. Yes, that's a true statement. And you pay attention to what your body feels like in that moment when you say, I am in the United States. Now say an untrue statement. I'm in China. That statement makes me feel weak and it makes me go out of alignment, basically. So it doesn't feel true, and this can get difficult because things can, like, there are things in the factual universe that might not necessarily feel true or be counterintuitive. So this also is important, why you have your gut feeling, but you need to then back up your gut feeling with your rational brain, and then back up both of those with feedback from other people. And then another important thing that I've learned from the tantric philosophy, spiritual philosophy, is that you also can have a spiritual community, and so you need to also back up the things that you have found with the spiritual community, with the wise teachers, personal one-on-one teachers who you've had more than 1 year of experience watching, and then also scripture. So going into the scripture of whichever spiritual tradition you think, and so you basically use this network of things to determine whether something is true or not. Your own experience, the experience of others, the scripture, the teacher, your gut, your rational brain. And then for people, and the really difficult situation is that there are people who are really, really good at lying, and really good at being charismatic, and hiding their intentions. And so I have learned, particularly in business, this is something that you learn in business, if there's money involved, money really brings out the worst in people. It can bring out the worst in people. That you got, like, you only can trust somebody after years of experience with them, of little tiny steps towards testing them. And over years, you might develop relationships that you can trust. And that's why it's good to go back to Alex's framework on trust, which is that nobody should get 100% trust ever. You can always say no. The ability to say no is really important. Something it took me a while to understand is that I always have the ability to say no. And I always have the ability to pull out at any time, if based on somebody else's behavior. So hopefully this is helpful. Just sharing what I've learned.